Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back into the channel. I had a pretty interesting idea that I wanted to get out to you in video form, and that is talking about how to distinguish between players, a specific factor that's going to let you distinguish between players whenever you're building your team in MLB The Show 23. Now, this can apply to pretty much any player within the game, whether it be young prospects or, actual impact players that you want to try to add to your team, and this can apply to various different game modes as well. But we're really going to be looking at young players specifically today, but like I said, you can apply the same logic to just about anybody within the game, and that in particular is Quirks, and the way that they've kind of changed Quirks in the game this year. They've removed what are called passive Quirks from the game, which means that they're removing the ones that are tied to a specific rating. Instead, you're just kind of given the quirks, and that's operating in a completely different way than it used to. So you can see some of these players here have specific quirks, like Rally Monkey, for example, or Day Player, and these players are coming in as rookies into the league. So one big way that you can help build your team is by finding players that have good quirks that are going to set themselves apart from other players in your organization and other players in other organizations. That's one thing that I've been looking for and has stood out to me a little bit more, but tends to be an overlooked aspect of MLB The Show, especially within franchise mode. I mean, I myself am guilty of specifically just looking at a player's ratings and determining whether I want to add the player to my team based on his rating. So I might look at a guy like Bartolo Brito, for example, and see that he's got 70 contact and pretty good speed, and just say, yeah, add that guy to my team. However, this guy's not coming in with any quirks, and we might be able to compare him to some other players that have advantageous quirks that are going to make him more successful in the long run. That's something that, like I said, I've started to notice as I've drafted more and more players and I've added players to my team, that's going to make quite a bit of a difference. When I actually take a look at most of the players that are at the top of my Pirates roster, for example, they don't really have many, if any, quirks whatsoever. So David Bednar has none. Ke'Bryan Hayes just has Fighter, O'Neal Cruz has none, and Mitch Keller has no quirks. So that's kind of detrimental to the roster as a whole. Whenever you talk about some of the major players within the league, they are going to have quirks, and they're going to have multiple of those quirks, and that's going to positively impact the way that they play, and so you're going to be more influenced to try to add those players to your team. But like I was saying, that's going to impact who you draft quite a bit as well. So one great example of this, a player that I drafted that I really like the capabilities of, even though he's a 58 overall A potential, is Scott Felsch. This guy has the first pitch hitter quirk, which is fantastic to have on any batter that's coming up to the plate. Excels at hitting the first pitch of an at-bat. I want to make sure that I now focus on this guy and getting this guy up in my organization. So right now he's currently in single A. He's really not going to be playing any games. He's not going to be getting a whole lot of development time. I might now want to focus on this guy, or if he's not on my team, I want to add this guy to my roster and focus on that guy. So now that I'm looking at it, I want to get this guy into Double A so that he's getting some playing time. I want to make sure that he has opportunities to develop and opportunities to succeed. But you compare that against a guy like my first overall draft pick in Monte Maynard, and he has no quirks whatsoever. So those quirks can definitely set you apart. And I have some other guys that have quirks as well, like Eldon Hill here, my center fielder, that has home body, performs better when playing at home. That's certainly better to have on a player than no quirk whatsoever. So when I compare that against some of the other top center field prospects in my organization, I might want to focus specifically on Eldon Hill and developing him up to be my top center fielder, because none of these other guys do have any quirks. So that is something that you are going to want to avoid overlooking. And like I said, it's something that I feel like is often overlooked within franchise mode especially, and something that I tend to overlook, but something that I want to call your attention to early on, because we've been talking about drafting players. We've been talking about all these important factors to building up a team, building up a franchise within MLB The Show. Whether you're already a good team or you're a rebuild team, whatever it might be, you're still going to have all these draft picks coming into your team, and you might be able to revamp your system, whether it be your existing MLB level players or your players in the minor league system, and try to add players that are specifically going to be helpful to you in having those additional quirks. And you can see another starting pitcher prospect here in Mitch Estrella that also came in with the home body quirk. Now, it is absolutely more difficult to come across these players, and there's not really an efficient way for you guys to be able to find players across the league that are going to have quirks to add to your team. But the best thing that I can recommend is going through the player search feature and searching for players that fit your criteria and what you're trying to do. So, searching for younger players that are going to potentially have decent development. Maybe I'll look for players that are, 78 overall and below and have mid B potential or better. And that's going to bring up a big list of comparables. And you might want to, kind of pare that list down. Maybe I'm looking for a first baseman, and then you're going to get a nice little list to be able to compare. And then you can bring up their player card from there and take a look at the different quirks available to them. So far I've already identified a couple of players that have quirks, but like I said, it's really difficult to find players this year that do have quirks that are going to be able to help your team. Player here that might be pretty helpful to us would be a guy like Carlos Salgado, who is only a 63 overall, A potential. That might not have a ton of value to other organizations, but in a couple of years we might be able to develop him pretty substantially. And when you compare him to his peers, he's one of the only players here that has any quirks. I mean, we had to go to the two top players that are pretty much MLB ready players to find any quirks. If we really wanted to target a player in specific, we might look at Andrew Vaughn, who was a player, by the way, that I was considering getting in this franchise, and I might still consider getting, because now that I notice he has 4 quirks, that adds a ton of extra value. Road warrior, first pitch hitter, fighter, and situational hitter is absolutely phenomenal, especially that situational hitter and first pitch hitter. I really like the ability to excel at driving in runners from third with less than 2 outs, and as well hitting the first pitch of an at-bat, because I do swing quite a bit. But that's going to set this guy apart, and that's something that I'm definitely now looking for, and I'm certainly going to try to not overlook. But that gives me a good idea of some players that I can potentially add at a position of need, and then you can do the same thing, just going through multiple positions and scrolling over to that tab. But as I go through here, you can really see why I'm kind of bringing this up, because there are a lot of players that do fall into this category that don't have any quirks whatsoever. I mean, so far, just in this search alone, we've identified 3 players. They were all at first base. We have identified no second baseman. Here's finally a third baseman that does have the unfazed quirk. And then I think this might be the same third baseman that we talked about before that had quirks. And then Rob Trent, who is in our Pirates organization, that has unfazed and a day player. So that one's huge that he's already in our organization. But you, like I said, can kind of see how rare getting these players with quirks actually is. I mean, a lot of players that are top prospects that are already within the roster, that are already within the league, don't have quirks. Like Ji-Win Bae, for example, is a player that you might think, because he's a utility player, he offers a lot of versatility, he's athletic, he does a lot of things at the plate well, would have some type of quirk, but he just doesn't. So it is super rare, and it's going to be able to kind of set your team apart. And this is going to really apply especially to you if you're trying to do a rebuild, or you're trying to do one of the more difficult teams in the league. If you're really looking to try to find value within the league, then this might be something that has more value to you, something that you should look out for. Because if you're trying to get away with 60, 70s, and 80 overall players like you would be if you're doing a Pirates franchise or a Tigers franchise or an Oakland A's franchise or a Giants franchise, you're going to be looking for these players that you can get value with. And there's really not a whole lot of them. And so what I might actually do, and if you guys are interested in this, let me know down in the comments section, because this actually kind of reminds me of what I do on Madden. But I might do a hidden gems type of a series, or I don't know exactly what I would call it, a quirks type of a series, to identify players like CJ Abrams, for example, that you're going to want to be on the lookout for. You're going to want to target if you're really trying to find value in franchise mode, because this is a guy that is going to really, really help out your team. Excels at hitting pitches outside the strike zone. That is going to be massive in any type of franchise that you're using these types of players from the get-go. So if you are starting with those Pirates, the Tigers, the A's, the Giants, those types of teams that aren't very good, that don't have very high overalls, the Royals as well, then this is the type of player that you need. You need these guys on your team, and you need to trade for these guys, or you need to develop these guys, because that can help you then compete against the teams that are far better, that have those 90s, that have multiple 90s on their team that are going to be the top end spenders in the league. This could really help get you on the same level of those teams, because these quirks seem to have a bigger impact this year when they are actually on these players. And whenever you're able to get a few of them together on the same team that work well together, you get a handful of these in the lineup, like bad hitter and things like that, first pitch hitter and whatnot, and you're going to be able to excel with guys that are maybe lower overall and don't have the great contact or the great power or the great vision that the 90 plus overall players do have. And same thing on the defensive side of the ball and the pitching side. You're going to be able to get better performance out of lower overall players and lower rated players because of these quirks that are available to them. So anyway, it's just something that I wanted to kind of put on your radar to make sure that you guys are on the lookout for, because like I said, it's actually pretty difficult to find players, as you can see as I've gone through here, that have these types of quirks, that have these things that are going to set them apart. And it's going to be something that I really focus on beyond just their potential and their ratings and things like that, because that's going to be the type of team that I'm always playing with, is the Pirates or the Oakland A's or the Giants, or teams that just don't have that great of a roster right now. I mean, you take a look at the Pittsburgh Pirates, we have a couple of 80 overall players. I need players that can compete in that 70s range. That's just the fact of the matter. And, like I said, when you look at some of these other teams, only a handful of 80 overall players. I mean, you need guys that are in the 70s, that are potentially even in the 60s, that you can get better performances out of. And this is kind of what I talk about with my Madden Hidden Gems videos, players that are kind of coded to play better. And that's basically what this is. You can just actually see what they're coding to play better, and that is the quirks that are actually available on those players. So, keep this in mind whenever you guys are building teams within MLB The Show 23, whether it be DD or franchise mode or whatever you're playing. You're going to want to be on the lookout for those players that do have quirks on their player card, because that's going to make all the difference for you. So hopefully this was useful to you in some way, and if it was, leave a like on the video, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next video, and I hope you have a good one.